Just by way of introduction, Dr. Jane Goodall is iconic in the world for symbolizing something that so many people aspire to, for the caring of the other beings of the planet, for thinking about the planet as one place that we all share, for having committed her own professional and personal life to trying to understand the other beings on this world, starting so deeply with the pets around her house, and then the chimpanzees that she taught the whole world with, but then maybe even more importantly, ever since then, with the Jane Goodall Insitute and with Roots and Shoots and taking care of orphaned and wounded chimpanzees and other great apes, but also sharing everything that you learn from that with people all around the world. It is rare to be able to talk to someone who is a legend and so universally respected and well known. And so it is my great pleasure to be speaking with you today as part of Elevate Endeavour. So once again, thank you for joining us, Dr. Goodall.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me indeed.
You're talking to us today from, you can see some of the pictures behind you, in fact, from one of your childhood homes, but I think it was the one that when the war came, you spent sheltered from the war down in Bournemouth and then went to schools there afterwards. But your mind wasn't limited to being in Bournemouth. Like myself as a child, I was reading science fiction and imagining that maybe someday I'd have a chance to fly in space. I was reading Edgar Rice Burroughs and his fanciful ideas of Mars and space flight. But you took those childhood ideas of some of the people that you'd been reading, maybe even on those books that are behind you right now. And I'm interested, what did that give you as a view of the world, specifically because you spent a lot of your life there, Africa? How did you imagine Africa to be as a child reading about it? And how heavily influenced was it by those fanciful visions of some of the great authors? And then when you got on a ship and sailed for, I guess at the time, 3 weeks to get all the way to Kenya from England, you probably left out of London or maybe Bournemouth, I'm not sure, but how did the Africa that you arrived in differ from the imagined Africa that you've been reading about for so many years?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to realize that Africa, I mean, there's so many different bits of Africa. There's plains and deserts and forests and woodland and, so the part of Africa that I dreamed about was the forest because of Tarzan and Edgar Rice Burroughs. I read him too, but whereas you were up in the air, I was down in the forest. And of course, I also read Dr. Dolittle. Dr. Dolittle took animals from the circus back to Africa, and he spoke to the animals, and that was just, he was taught to speak animal language. So my dreams were to go to Africa and to live with wild animals and to write books about them. Wasn't any thought in my mind of being a scientist, because girls didn't dream about that sort of thing back then. And everybody laughed at me. How will you possibly get there? It's far away. You don't have money. We had very little money. World War II was raging. I was 10 years old, and my father had joined the army, and I was living here. This was my grandmother's house. So we're in the fourth generation now. It's really a family home. And so it was only my mother who said, well, if you really want to do something like this, then you're going to have to work awfully hard and take advantage of every opportunity. But if you don't give up, you may find a way. Whereas everybody else was saying, well, girls don't do that sort of thing. So it was my mother. She had a huge influence on me. And yes, finally I got on this boat. There weren't planes flying back and forth in those days. Just a few, but they were very expensive. I think it was the old BOAC probably.
Right.
Yeah. So my boat should have gone through the Suez Canal, of course, but there was a war with Egypt. And so I had to go all the way around the Cape. So the first place I set foot on African soil was Cape Town.
You went all the way around the Cape. I mean, that's the Portuguese just made that voyage in what, 1486 or so. That must have been a wonderful way to be introduced to all of Africa.
It wasn't, we're seeing how the sea changed and seeing flying fish and dolphins. But landing in Cape Town, although at first it was really exciting, real Africa. But then I kept, Mum had a couple of friends there and they were looking after me for the 2 days. The boat was, guess, getting new supplies. And on the back of the seats and the doors into the restaurant, everywhere, there were these words in Afrikaans, sex blanc. But what does these mean? White people only. And
Right.
I wasn't brought up that way. So I was very pleased to leave Cape Town. And then when I got to Kenya, where my friend was who'd invited me, went up to her farm. And there were lots of trees around there. They were known as the White Highlands in those days. And the very first morning, I woke up and outside my window, there were two big leopard paw prints. So now I've really arrived in my Africa. And then I met Louis Leakey, and I think he was so impressed by how much I knew about animals, even though I hadn't been to college back then. And he gave me this job in the museum.
I've heard a story that you had the audacity as you say, sort of a self-professed women don't do this type of thing there in the mid 1950s, but you had the audacity, but also the guts and the gumption to sort of just get his number and cold call him. Is that true? And if so, how did you feel that day? You must have been so nervous.
No, I wasn't, because, my whole being was concentrated on getting out there. And somebody said, if you're interested in animals, you should meet Leakey. So any nervousness was subsumed by this tremendous desire. This is somebody who might be able to help me. So I did call him up, and yes, I was shy, but this was more important. And he took me around, he asked all these questions, and I could answer many of them. And so that's how it all began.
So the passion of what you'd been inspired by Edgar Rice Burroughs and the other authors, Kipling with the Jungle Book, they gave you such a burning desire that it allowed you to overcome your own fears and give you the confidence to do something like to call, a world-renowned figure like Dr. Louis Leakey. That's when I was getting ready for my first space flight, I trained and studied, and I'd been dreaming about it since I was a little child also. I had this niggling feeling though that what if I don't like it? What if I get there and it's nothing like I dreamed it would be? Did you have any sort of trepidations or fear that way on this grand voyage?
No, actually I didn't. I just felt, here now my dream's coming true. This is what was meant to be. That's how it was. And of course, the final thing was Leakey took me with one other young girl and his wife. They used to go for 3 months searching for fossils, early man, on the Serengeti Plains, Olduvai, very famous now. And we go with him. And, back then, well, Gillian and I were allowed out on the plains. And we met rhino, we met lion, we just face to face walking. And that was Africa. That was my Africa. It was really, gosh, it was so exciting. And I think that's when Leakey thought, well, he told me actually that I behaved just right when we met these animals. And so he asked if I would be prepared to go and learn about the chimpanzees. Magic.
Wow, that must have just felt like a magic door opening for you at the time to be asked that question.
It was. The lucky thing was, one, he wanted somebody who hadn't been to university. He said he wanted a mind uncluttered by the reductionist way that the early animal behavior people were thinking. And two, he wanted a woman because he felt women maybe were more patient and would do better. So I was really lucky.
And I have two sons and a daughter, and my wife and I, we met in high school. We've been together for, 45 years or so. I think I could make a fairly easy observation that there's a thing called boy eyes when you're looking for something, and there's girl eyes. And if you truly, I'm not sure why it is, but just through empirical observation, we don't seem to be very good at looking for stuff. And do you think that was part of what Dr. Leakey was thinking, was your ability to be inquisitive, but also to notice the small detail? Do you think he was born out to be right?
Well, you know, I'm not really sure, but because he didn't tell me any of this at the time. He just said, would I be prepared to go and try and learn about them, because nobody had done it. And his purpose was, he'd been searching for the fossils of Stone Age people. And behavior doesn't fossilize. Lots of other things do. From the bone, you can tell how the creature walked and the tooth were, what it was feeding on. But behavior, no. So his belief, which is now corroborated, and about 6 million years ago, there was an ape-like, human-like creature. And he believed that if I saw behavior in chimps today that was the same or similar to humans' behavior today, maybe that behavior was in that common ancestor, and that we brought it with us along our long, separate evolutionary pathways. Therefore, he felt this gives him a better way of imagining how these Stone Age people behave.
Sure. You'd been a secretary though, so how did you get yourself ready to fly in space? I studied and trained the technical side of things so heavily, so that when the moment came, I would have the skills that I needed. How did you get over your own fears of not knowing what to look for?
Well, I didn't have those fears, because all my life I'd watched the animals around my home here, not many, but you know, squirrels and lots of birds, and just being patient, getting them used to me so I could watch the mother and father bird feed their babies and the babies fly. And I got a squirrel to come and eat from my hand. And so I just knew that I could take those same skills, just because they happened to be chimpanzees. Well, I didn't realize how difficult it was going to be. I didn't realize how long it would take for the chimpanzees to lose their fear of me. You know, they're very conservative. They'd never seen a white ape before, and they would disappear. That was the worry.
Uh, and your mother came with you. Your mother's a writer, I understand. It must have been unusual to have your mother on a voyage like that. And I'm curious, what did you call your mother in conversation? And did she write while she was there with you in Tanzania and Kenya? And how long did she stay with you?
Okay, well, first of all, on that first voyage, the boat, I was on my own. I didn't have mum. The only reason she came when I went to Gombe was because what's Tanzania today was Tanganyika, was sort of one of the last outposts of the crumbling British Empire. And so the British authorities absolutely refused to take responsibility for a young girl going on her own in the forest. In the end, because Leakey never gave in, they said, oh, all right, but she's got to come with someone. So mum volunteered. And I had money for only 6 months to start with. I mean, you know, I had no degree, and it was amazing. We found a wealthy American philanthropist who said, okay, money for 6 months. And she stayed for 4 of those months. She had a little clinic. She wasn't a doctor or a nurse. And the fishermen would come from along the beach. She had aspirins and Epsom salts and the old fashioned remedies. And because she cared about people, she'd spend hours sort of treating tropical ulcers. She became known as the White Witch Doctor. And so she didn't really have time to do any writing. I don't remember her doing any writing except long letters to the family back home, and her other daughter who was still in the UK. So she was, I mean, the main thing she did for me was establish a really good relationship with the local people, which stood me in good stead ever since. And secondly, You know, in those early days, I'd come back depressed because though I knew I could get the chimps used to me in time, the months were rolling by and they still wouldn't let me near them. So she was there to boost my morale and say, but Jane, you found this peak, and through your binoculars, you're actually seeing all these different things. So that was a very important role she played.
You were speaking about your mother and the fact that she was taking care of local people. What a wonderful example for you. And I'm curious, what did you call your mother? What did she call you?
I called her Mum,
Hmm.
and she called me Jane.
Ah, okay, so no particular, and throughout your entire life that way?
Well, right at the end, everybody got these funny nicknames. My son became Grub, and for some reason, Mum became So everybody was calling her It's kind of odd, isn't it?
When you were observing the Cascade chimpanzees, but did you also observe yourself and did you keep a personal journal throughout any other stage of your life?
I kept a diary all through my childhood, but when I was at Gombe, it was, you know, when I started, all I had was a notebook and pencil. Didn't even have a typewriter to begin with, just a pair of old secondhand, not good enough binoculars. And that was it. And so when I got back, I mean, every morning I was up in the mountains before light. I didn't get back till it was almost dark. And so then I'd have supper with Mum. Then I'd write up my day's notes. So there wasn't time for anything else. It was hard work. And of course, once the teams got used to me, it was harder still because I was observing more and there was more to write.
I imagine. And flying a spaceship is by its very nature dangerous. It's visible when danger occurs. But it would seem to me, I mean, those animals are bigger than you or I, especially the large males, incredibly strong, the geometry of their arms and such. But have you ever thought about what is the most dangerous thing you've ever done? And what do you think that you would like to fly a spaceship?
Um, no, I don't. I was never attracted to space. I was attracted to deep down under the ocean, reading Jules Verne. But no, it was always forests and animals, forests and animals. You don't find any animals up there in space. So it didn't appeal to me at all. But when it comes to danger, well, yes, I have been dragged and stamped on by very strong chimps, but they weren't out to harm me. They were just trying to prove their dominance, which was ridiculous because they must have known. But anyway, and the worst things were when I got myself into stupid situations where I shouldn't have gone anywhere and climbed up a too steep slope. And, you know, I think the worst thing was when I reached up to finally pull myself up onto the ridge from this very steep, slippery slope. And I pulled up on this boulder, which is about this big, and it came loose and came down on top of me, and we both rolled. Thank goodness, something threw me off the trail into the side, and the boulder went on without me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here now. That's for sure. Same with the tubes. If they'd wanted to hurt me, I wouldn't be here now.
Yeah, and I think you read or wrote somewhere that you were the lowest ranking member of the chimpanzee troop for almost 2 years. And what did that actually mean? How did the behaviors manifest themselves when you are the lowest ranking member of a chimpanzee tribe?
Yeah, that's all these things get out on the internet. It's not actually true. I was not and did not wish to be a member of their community. Wanted to be an observer. And of course, it all changed with the bananas and the chimps coming and all that kind of stuff, which we wouldn't do today. But so I was separate. I wasn't belonging to their community at all. I was a kind of weird creature that suddenly appeared in their midst. And eventually they came to completely trust me. And I trusted them. And I think that's why it worked, probably. You know, we're still studying the same groups today. 60 years later, it's the longest running, I think it's the longest running study of any animal except maybe the Japanese monkeys.
Yeah, I've had a chance to go and see them in around the hot springs in Japan, and and their their learned behaviors and how the smart ones teach the rest of, and they have individual behaviors in each of their own groups. It's fascinating to watch and try and learn from. I envy you the life choices that you made to be able to go do that. Um, but it seems to me historically, life sometimes moves in eureka moments where things are sort of moving along normally, and then someone discovers fire or the wheel or something, and we have a whole new perspective. Out of those 60 years you just mentioned, Dr. Goodall, you mentioned you had, after 3 months in Gombe, observing a chimpanzee that you called David Greybeard. After 3 months, you observed that humans are not the only tool makers in the world, a boastful, prideful thing that we thought separated us from everything else. I'm curious, I mean, what do you learn from that? That in just 3 months of careful observation, you can dispel an entire bias of a species. The impact of what you were seeing, did you recognize it at the time? And what else does it extrapolate to?
Well, I certainly knew about it because of working with Louis Leakey all that time. And I knew perfectly well that when I saw David Greybeard not only using grass blades to fish for termites, but picking leafy twigs and stripping the leaves. So it actually didn't surprise me that chimps did that, because there had been a detailed study of a community of chimps in captivity by a German psychologist. And people poo-pooed what he said. They said, oh, well, his chimps were intelligent and did things because human behavior rubbed off on them. I mean, Western science, so arrogant, so flipping arrogant. And when you say, you know, we thought that only humans used and made tools, go and ask some pygmy in the African forest. He knows that chimpanzees make tools. It was, and you know, you didn't get that separation from the rest of the animals in Buddhism or Hinduism, things like that. It was just us and Western science and Western religion that made this divide. But anyhow, to go back to David and his tool using, one, it was just 2 weeks after Mom had left, and I was really sad that she wasn't there to share the excitement, because Louis Leakey, as I knew, was really excited. And because at that time we were defined as man, the toolmaker, and I sent all this stuff to Leakey, and he sent his famous telegram. I wish I had it. He said, we must now redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as human. So that was what brought the National Geographic in with money when the 6 months ran out. And they sent a filmmaker, photographer, Hugo van Lauwijk, who became my first husband, and recorded all, you know, gradually after David lost his fear. He sort of helped the others to lose their fear too. And once I got them to trust me a bit, then I could see the differences in personality. I could see differences in behavior. And I realized how like us they are in their communication, with kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another in reassurance. Began to learn about the mothers and their infants and their siblings, and the male dominance struggles where the males bristle and stand upright and swagger and shake their fists, just like some human male politicians, honestly. Just
Sure. Well, what traits? I see a picture behind you. I think that's you and your dog. What, obviously, you know, dogs have personalities, and what sort of traits do you admire? And and maybe you saw it manifested in the chimpanzees, but which chimpanzee did you admire the most?
well, the first one, David Greybeard, he was very gentle, um, very determined, and he was a born leader. He wasn't the alpha, the top ranking, not at all. He was best friends with the alpha, but he was a leader in that many of them chose to follow him because he was, if somebody got frightened, they'd run to David and he'd reassure them, especially the young one. So he was always, he was so special. He was very handsome. And, and then there was the old female Flo, the opposite of handsome, with her bulbous nose and ragged ears. And she was, she was the top ranking female. And anybody dared mess with her young ones, my goodness, they had old Flo to deal with. But her teeth were worn to the gums, her hair was sparse. She must have been well over 40, well over 40.
So what I'm hearing is you admire strength and thoughtfulness and caring for others, and perhaps selflessness a little bit. Is that an accurate guess, or what is it that you admire, not just in chimpanzees, but in dogs and people?
This here, you can see behind me, that's Rusty.
Yes, right.
My companion through childhood, who taught me, he taught me so much about animals, And so what I love about dogs, who actually are my favorite animal, I don't think of chimps as animals. They're too like us. There's nice ones and nasty ones. But dogs are so loyal. They're so loving. They're so, they're there for you. And dogs and humans help each other. So I suppose what I admire and love in a dog is this bonding that we have. Now, there was no bonding with the wild chimpanzees, although people bond with the orphans that we rescue and look after. So, and what I admire in the chimps, some of them, like this one here, that's Frodo, and he was mean, he was a bully, he was a real bully, and yet he could be so gentle with infant chimps. He had two sides to his personality. It's like the chimps themselves, they can be violent, brutal, even have a kind of primitive war, but at the same time they can be loving, compassionate, and truly altruistic.
And Flo was Frodo's grandmother, right?
Flo was Frodo's grandmother, that's right. Oh, then you were home.
How did she treat him?
Well, when he was young, he was charming. He was just a little, I called him my little frog. He kind of bounced. He held it, elder brother Freud, and the two of them, it was a joy to watch them. They were very close. But look, I have to show a really nice portrait of David Greybeard.
Oh, lovely.
See how handsome he is? He was just such an amazing, amazing character.
Those eyes, huh?
Yes, those eyes. And when you look into the eyes of a chimpanzee, you're looking into a thinking, feeling being. But that when Leakey made me go to Cambridge to do a PhD, and I'm sure you've heard that so many of the professors told me I'd done everything wrong. I couldn't give the chimps names. That wasn't scientific. They should have numbers. And I couldn't talk about their personality, their mind, or their emotions, because those were unique to us. But this guy, Rusty, he taught me that wasn't true. So I was able to stand up for what I believed in. And I got my PhD anyway. And what with my detailed observations and Hugo's film, and the fact that biologically chimps are so like us, 98.6% of DNA is the same. Science had to come out of that narrow way of thinking and admit that we are not the only beings with personality, mind, and emotion. And there isn't this gap between us and the rest of the animals, which I was told existed, and told the difference was one of kind, which is rubbish. So thanks to the chimps, they helped me to change the way science is considering animals. So you can study all those things now.
I'm in my 60s now, and you're in your 80s. When I look back, it seems like life goes in stages, whether you want it to or not. And you've had some very well-known stages to your life. But from what I just heard about your time at Cambridge, I can't imagine you thought it was wasted, but maybe to some degree it was. Have there been any portions of your life that you thought were wasted? And how do you deliberately shape your life's direction?
No, it's happened. It just it's fallen neatly into stages of learning and then sharing. And those stages, I mean, it seems that I've just had to make a decision at the crossroads. And I think I've made the right decisions. And so it just happened.
And so no, you don't feel that any of it ended up a dead end or a waste of any of your life?
No, I mean, what my time in Cambridge was immensely valuable. It taught me to think in a scientific, logical way. And at the same time, I was, I don't know what you'd call me, but I was able to stand up to the professors when they told me that to be a proper scientist, you've got to be coldly objective and you mustn't have empathy with your subject. And that is so wrong, because if you have empathy, you sort of get these aha moments and you think, I know why they're behaving like that. And then you can stand back and examine that as a scientist and subject it to the kind of rigor that science likes.
And you've been so productive over the years. And just recently, you have a new series that people can share in your ideas to this stage of life called The Hope, I think. But you have, I have one granddaughter. You have three grandchildren, I think, via your son Grub. What what gives you hope?
Well, my reasons for hope, I mean, okay, let's face it, we're going through very, very dark times right now with this political swing to the far right, the pandemic that we brought on ourselves by our disrespect of nature and our disrespect of animals. And, in addition to that, the same disrespect of nature has led to climate change. And I don't know if you see that from space. I'm sure you saw the Australian fires and things like that.
Yeah, I did. I photographed them, in fact, yes.
I mean, we're destroying this planet. It's the only one we have. And this big difference, the biggest difference between us chimps and other animals, is the development of our intellect. I mean, just think, you can go up into space. People are learning about galaxies that are hundreds and thousands of light miles away. It's unbelievable what our intellect can do. So how is it that we're destroying our only planet because of this mercenary greed for more and more stuff, possessions, power? We're ruining it in that way.
I agree. You've said that each of us has a dark side and a noble side, and it's sort of the tug of war that defines your life. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but that defines the pattern of your own life.
But I didn't answer your question. So very quickly, the main reason for hope is working with youth. Secondly, it's this brain. We're beginning to come up with solutions, even in our daily lives, how we can leave a lighter footprint. Next, it's the resilience of nature. You can destroy a place, bring an animal to the brink of extinction, and give time and help, and nature can take over again. And then the indomitable human spirit, the people who tackle what seems impossible and won't give up. So to answer your question, those are my reasons for hope.
They're good reasons, and you've acted on them as well, which I think is so important. Well, when you were 43 or so in 1977, you decided to found the Jane Goodall Insitute. I assume it was partially with those same objectives in mind. You were thinking at the time. What was it? Was there something that happened, or was it just you completed a portion of your life? What were the reasons for founding the Institute and choosing the goals of the Institute?
It was a very strange reason, but yes, something happened. 4 of my students, I had this little research station, they were kidnapped. They were kidnapped by rebels from just over Lake Tanganyika in what was then Zaire. It's DRC now. And so all the funding from my research ended. And but I wasn't about to give up. So some friends of mine said, okay, well, we'll set up an NGO, and then, you can give some lectures and raise some money. And yeah, so that's how I was pushed to start it. And so right at the beginning, people said, oh, well, you're setting it up to carry on the research. I said, yes, carry on the research now. But, you know, chimps are in trouble in many places. So I want the Institute eventually to also support conservation, and then education. And of course, it's grown now, but if you think about the darkness that we're going through, in order to come out the other side, we have to tackle really 4 things. One, poverty, extreme poverty, cut down the last trees, fish the last fish, buy the cheapest junk food that's harmed the environment, because you have to survive. And then we've got to do something about our unsustainable lifestyles, which is what we each do as individuals. And we have to do something about corruption. And we have an ever-growing human population. So with 7.2 billion of us now, in some places, natural resources used up faster than nature can replenish them. And they're estimating that in 2050, it'll be closer to 10 billion, 9.7 billion.
Yeah, I've heard those numbers as well, and we and hopefully you can hear me okay right now. But we need, if we truly want to have a good quality of living for up somewhere 9 or 10 billion as a peak population of humans, we can't do exactly the same things that we've been doing for the last 10,000 years, specifically since the Industrial Revolution. It just won't extrapolate properly. And that's definitely what, through the Jane Goodall Institute, you're addressing some of those issues. But I just have a question. COVID has made it quite difficult, of course, to not just to travel, but to stay closely in touch with some things. How, with your travel schedule and all of your responsibilities, and especially under COVID, how do you stay in touch with the Institute? How do you make sure that things are still progressing in the way that's close to your heart, that addresses those 4 major world issues that we're all facing?
Well, first of all, there are 24 Jane Goodall Institutes in 24 different countries. One in Canada, which is doing super well. It's very much put together and is contributing a lot to our Africa programs and the youth program, Roots and Shoots. And so how do I keep in touch? I do a lot of Zoom calls with the different institutes and, you know, talk to the board and talk to the staff. And that's a fact, I keep in better touch with them now than I did traveling. Because when you travel, I mean, I can't go to all these 24 Jane Goodall Institute countries. Roots and Shoots, the youth program, is in 86 countries. So I can reach more of them now, although it's not the same. But I do keep in good touch with them.
And Roots and Shoots, as I understand it, you and what, 12.5 high school students in Dar es Salaam were sitting on a porch and just having a conversation, and that sort of similar to this one, where you start talking about what really matters and how can our actions perhaps have a positive influence on the world. Were you often meeting with teenage youth at that time, and do you still have a chance to do that?
Oh yeah, well, it was the 30th anniversary of the Gombe research. So I was giving lectures around Tanzania in high schools and middle schools and universities. But these 12 high school students came to see me because they had all these problems, all these different problems about conservation, the shooting of animals in the national park, the illegal dynamiting for fish, which is destroying the coral reef, the homeless children, the bad treatment of stray dogs. They all had different things. So I told them to go back to their 8 schools and get their friends who felt the same. And we had a big meeting, and this Roots and Shoots was born, which we decided from the beginning it will involve projects. Each group will choose a project to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment, because it's all interrelated, as I learned in the rainforest. And that the young people would choose their own projects so that they go into things, they talk about it, and then they roll up their sleeves and take action. It's all about taking action. So now we have members in, even few in preschool, lots of kindergarten, lots of university, and everything in between. So when I'm traveling, I always fit in 1 or 2 school or university visits. And I can still do that with a Zoom or a Skype or something.
And I know that you choose what you eat, and you've chosen not to eat meat. You eat plants and vegetables. But has it always been that way? Was there a specific event that helped shape your thinking and your choices? And then how can you try and convince other people to decide the ramifications of their own actions and their own simple choices, like what am I going to eat for dinner?
Well, first you asked about, was there a specific incident? I was reading the book by Peter Singer called Animal Liberation. It was the late 60s. And I had no idea about factory farms at that time, because when I went to Tanzania, there certainly were none, certainly not in the UK anyway. And so I was shocked. I could not believe animals were being treated like this. And the next time I looked at my plate with a bit of chicken on it, and I thought, this symbolizes fear, pain, death. That was the last. I didn't eat it. I didn't eat anything after it. But how do you convince other people? I think telling stories. The worst way is to try and argue with people and point fingers at them and make them feel that they're bad. But when you explain that all these billions of animals are suffering, they all have personalities, they're sentient beings, they feel pain and fear. And you can show, I should have it here, but I haven't. There's an amazing, you can Google this afterwards, you should. It's a pig. She was rescued from slaughter. She's called Picasso instead of Picasso. Picasso. She loves to paint, and her paintings are selling for over $500. And she is so happy. She even dips the brush in different colors herself and makes these paintings. And so if you, rather than just tell people all the horrors, you show that video. And so many people said, oh, I hate you. I can never eat bacon again. But, they all have to be fed. We're using fossil fuel, destroying forests to grow the grain, fossil fuel to get the grain to the animals, to the abattoir, meat to the table. Water, precious water, which is drying up because of climate change. Lots of water used to change vegetable to animal protein. And then they're producing this methane gas in their digestion. And that's a very, very bad greenhouse gas. So with all these things, plus the effect on our own health, the antibiotics that are routinely used to keep them alive, that are, creating all these super bugs. So when you explain it to people, then without criticizing them, I think that's the key.
And you've told stories so well over the years, and having National Geographic help you tell the stories has been great. But one that when I watch it, it just puts tears in my eyes. You have a chimpanzee rehabilitation center in the Congo, I think, and I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Something like Chimpunga or Chimpunga, Chimpunga. And there's a video of you with a chimpanzee that was rehabilitated and getting ready to be released, called Wunda, and just your hands and her hands through the bars, and in that picture, yes. And then when she, of her own spontaneity and just sense of gratitude, just prior to wandering away as you'd hoped, gave you a hug, it put a lump in my throat that's even there right now, just even visualizing it, the power of sharing that story. If it had just happened privately, it would have been just as powerful for you, but had so much less impact on me and millions of other people. But what did she see in you, and what did you see in her?
This is what's weird. I mean, to me, I only met her that day. So Rebecca, the veterinarian who runs the show, she's the director, she saved her life twice. And yet when Wunda comes out of that cage she's being transported in, although she runs to Rebecca, she just turns her back on Rebecca, who pats her reassuringly. And then, she climbs up on this crate and she looks like past me and then back, this double take sort of thing. And she just comes over, and it's most unusual for a chimpanzee to embrace you that long, and as it's a baby. And one of the African caregivers afterwards, he said, how did she know that that lady's responsible for everything? But of course she didn't. But I do have this kind of, I don't know, I think it's some kind of telepathic communication with animals sometimes. But it makes everybody cry. I tell it when I'm showing that video in lectures, and I look out across the auditorium and I see everybody go.
Oh, and rightly so. It's something that colloquially we would call a human moment, but in fact, it's just a moment of shared life, right?
Out of all the females we've had, they're all on birth control because we've got 167 and it's very expensive. We haven't got any more room, so they're on birth control. And out of all these years, only 2 implants have gone wrong, and one was Wunda's. So she has a gorgeous little girl who's now 4, and she's called Hope.
Ah, nice. That's great. That nice continuity. We have, speaking of little ones, we have a young lady who is going to join us, maybe to have the other end of the human age spectrum, to get her perspective and to ask you some questions, if now's a good time. She's in Ottawa today, and her name is Jaya.
Hi, Dr. Jane Goodall. So nice meeting you.
Lovely meeting you.
I have a couple questions for you. So my first question is, how did you feel when you saw the chimpanzees acted like humans?
Acting like humans. Well, we are pretty close. There's no animal closer to us than chimpanzees. But it was just really exciting to see how like us they are. They're so like us. And the more I stayed with them, the more like us they were. And they all have their own personalities. And they kiss each other and they embrace and they pat one another. They also, sadly, they fight one another like we do, but they also make up quarrels very quickly and reassure each other. And then that's when they hug and they kiss.
Okay. My second question is, what was your first night in the jungle like?
Well, the first night I spent at Gombe, I was down in the camp and I pulled my little camp bed out underneath the palm tree, and I could look up at the stars, and there was the moon, and it was like, wow, I'm here, how exciting. The first time I slept alone up in the mountains, because I used to go up there to be near when the chimps woke up in the morning, because they make beds in the tree every night. And while I was up there, I'd taken up a little tin trunk to this peak I found, and I used to stay up there. Sometimes I could make a cup of coffee, because I had a little kettle, and I had a little stream, and I used to fill the kettle with water from the little stream. And I had a blanket up there. So I was up there this first night ever up in the mountains, and I heard a leopard. And I don't know why I was scared of leopards. I didn't really need to be, but I was. And so what did I do? Well, I thought, I'm meant to be here. I'm sure that none of the animals are going to hurt me. And so I just pulled the blanket over my head. And people say, but you were stupid. Those animals could have hurt you. Well, but they didn't, did they? All these years, not one of them has hurt me.
Okay, my other question is, I want to help the chimpanzees and the other animals in Africa, but how can I help them when I'm so far away?
Well, you can help them very easily. First of all, I presume you know about roots and shoots, don't you?
Yes.
You're part of roots and shoots. So a lot of roots and shoots, young people, they raise money, they do bake sales, or they do, I don't know what they do, but they manage to raise money somehow or other, and they become a chimpanzee guardian. So you raise the money and then you get a picture of your chimp, and you know that the money raised is going to help keep that little orphan chimp alive. So that's something you can do. But you can also talk to people about the need to help the chimps. And we have to stop cutting down forests. And the other thing you can do, which will really help, is plant trees. Planting trees helps us fight climate change. And, you know, the climate change is affecting the chimps along with everything else. So planting trees is something which in the end will help the faraway chimps. So money and planting trees. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
And I'm really happy to meet you, Jaya, and I hope that when this pandemic is over, we shall be able to actually meet, because I do come to Ottawa when I come to Canada. So I'll be able to meet you.
Wow, I would like to meet you too.
Good. Then we'll meet each other and we'll have a nice chimpanzee hug.
Okay.
Okay?
Jaya, did you have any further questions, or that was your list?
Have you got a question for Chris?
Yes, I actually do have some questions for Mr. Chris Hadfield. Okay, my first question is, the first time you went into space, were you scared?
Jaya, Dr. Jane said something when she was speaking about hearing the leopard that I think is sort of the same experience that an astronaut is. And that is, you hear something, or you know about something you're not used to, and then you ask yourself, what did I do, or what do I do next? And when I'm scared, it's because I don't know what to do next. Normally, I haven't thought about it. I haven't pictured maybe what might happen in my life, and so I try and not to be in a position where I don't know what to do next, where I have no idea, where I'm completely helpless in the face of my own life. I think it's really important to consider what might happen in the future and think about how are you changing who you are. Your question of how can you support that's the type of question that is so healthy, because what you're really saying is, how can I change myself in order to be closer to doing something that I think is important, or that is maybe worth taking a risk for. And it's the same for, I don't know, for flying a spaceship or doing a spacewalk. Is that important to me? And to me, when I was your age, when I was 9, it was the most important thing I could imagine, to try and go physically explore the rest of the universe. But I recognized they're not going to let someone who has no idea what they're doing go do that. I'm going to have to change who I am. And I started working on it when I was turning 10. And I worked on it my whole life to try and be someone that they might trust to command a spaceship. And so when the moment came, even though it was just as dangerous as the howl of that leopard in the night, I studied it, and I knew sort of what I could do about it and what my actions could be. And that allowed me not to just be afraid, because you don't just have to be afraid, especially if you've turned yourself into somebody who can do things, or who has the bravery to understand what you might do next. And so to me, that's the most important thing. There's always danger out there. The real question is, have you spent some time changing who you are, so that you have some idea of what you're going to do next?
Wow, okay. My other question for you is, What were you thinking the first time you stepped outside of like space?
It was such a magical moment, Jaya. I'd been dreaming about doing a spacewalk since I watched Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and the other 10 human beings that walked on the moon. I thought the ultimate experience in my life would be to fly in space. And the ultimate part of flying in space would be to go outside alone. But maybe sort of like Dr. Jane taking her cot out on that first night in the jungle so she could truly experience the stars personally. But an astronaut's life is so technical. It's so much driven by the machine that you're in that things don't just happen. Going outside on a spacewalk takes hours and there's 500 things that you have to do. But the moment finally comes, Jaya, when you turn this crank on the hatch in front of you and you get that hatch up and out of the way, and then you push the cover open. And I grabbed onto the hatch and physically, almost, like giving birth to myself, pulled myself out into the universe for the very first time. And I didn't really know what to expect. I understood all the technical stuff and I knew the jobs I had to do next. But as I pulled myself out and the world on one side and the infinity of the blackness of the night and the stars on the other filled my head, when I watch the video of that now, I see that I stopped. I physically stopped. My thoughts were stupefied by the overpowering environment of where I was. And it would have been disrespectful to have ignored it. And so I stopped for a while, even though there was all this pressure to get all the jobs done, and just tried to understand where my work had taken me and where I was now. And that somehow I was going to have to integrate this perspective into the rest of my life. And then I pushed myself out and concentrated and did my next task and my next task. But I think I wasn't afraid. I was overwhelmed by the natural beauty of the earth and the universe. I was amazed at the huge privilege I had to be there, seeing it with these two eyes, because it's such a rare privilege to be trusted to go do that. And then afterwards, I felt an enormous necessity and compunction that I've got to do my best to let other people see what I saw and feel it the way that I felt it. Because that's the reality of our world. It's one place that you can look at in a glance. And we all share this one spot. And we can say that conceptually, but when you pull yourself out of a spaceship and see it there, like this great floating jewel in front of you, suddenly it's unavoidable in affecting your thinking for the rest of your life. And it's why I'm talking with you today and why I'm so happy to talk with Dr. Goodall, to try and share some of those perspectives. If you get a chance, Jaya, to do a spacewalk or to take your little cot outside the tent and sleep looking at the stars on the edge of the jungle, make sure that you do that.
Okay.
And you can start at home. You don't have to go to Africa. You've got beautiful forests and woods and country in Canada. So that's just as exciting. You don't have to go far away to get that excitement of being out in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have other questions, Jaya?
No, I do not, but thank you for having me here.
Well, thank you for asking such good questions. And I think, were you scared? Were you frightened to come and talk to us on Zoom?
I was excited but a little nervous because what if I mess up, or what if I do that or do this? But I'm really happy that I'm here and I had this opportunity to talk to you too.
Yeah, well, it was lovely talking to you. And as I say, one day we'll meet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Okay.
Thank you very much, Jaya. And thank you to the lady just off camera, to Suzanne, that's helping you as well. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I think we just have time for maybe a couple more questions. Who's the strongest being that you've ever known?
The strongest who?
Being. It doesn't have to be a human being,
Oh,
but
being.
the strongest being that you've ever known.
You mean the strength of personality, not strength physical?
Yes.
Well, I nearly 87. You've met so many amazing, incredible people. I can't really answer that. I mean, my grandmother was amazingly strong. My mother, incredibly strong. I've got a niece who's really, really strong, and a granddaughter. But then there's all those other people out there. And, you know, I remember going through World War II, and it was, I'm glad I grew up then, because I learned to value everything, not to take anything for granted. Food was rationed, clothes were rationed, people were dying. And although I was only young, it impacted me. And seeing the victims from the Holocaust, the skeletons coming out barely alive. And so, you know, then, but for Winston Churchill, we would have been overrun by the Germans. I have no hesitation. And the strength of him was the way he got everybody's spirit going, and telling us that we were going to fight on the beaches, and old men came out with their pitchforks, and women went and planted things in the fields, digging for victory. And then, oh, the British sense of humor got us through an awful lot too. And then the brave people fighting in the Battle of Britain, and the soldiers. And so it made a big difference. Lots of strong people there.
Especially if you read what Churchill wrote at the time, and his own internal turmoil, of course, and his own uncertainties, but the ability to find his strength and then give it to other people. It ended up shaping the history of the time. The strength of one person.
And unfortunately, we have somebody shaping things in a very, very, very poor way right now.
Yeah, and we're such an imperfect species. I want to ask you just a silly question. One of the things astronauts get asked all the time is, what if you meet an alien? Does NASA train you what to do if you meet an alien? But you're the closest I can think of someone at least taking Western sensibilities anyway, and going to meet the chimpanzees, and not just treat them as numbered lab animals, but actually to try and observe them in a more compassionate and deep way. If you were to be asked, okay, in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the aliens are coming, or a species that as yet we barely understand. There's all the legends of Yeti and Bigfoot, and who knows if an animal like that is for real. But sort of following on to Jaya's question, how would you get ready if you were the emissary to go and meet a new species, whether it was one we hadn't found on Earth or one that was coming from somewhere beyond our planet?
Well, I think I would probably react in the same way as when I went to meet the chimpanzees, to be honest. I don't think that I would feel very different about it. And interestingly, they say probably the closest creature on the planet with a mind as close to what we might imagine an alien to have, an outer space alien, is the octopus, because they're absolutely bizarre. They've got 9 brains, one in their head and one in each of their arms. And each arm can work separately, and they can solve problems, and they seem to have a sense of humor. And yet they're so completely, utterly alien to us in every possible way, even the environment they live in. So but if I met a real alien, a spaceship alien where it comes down and lands and aliens get out, I think I'd be curious, and I would just, as I did with the chimps, just feel that I'm not threatening. So they're not going to hurt me, because they will see that I'm not going to hurt them. I don't know. What about you?
I'd vote for you. I'd vote for you to be the emissary of our species for sure if we're faced with that. Yeah, I think I would probably just try and emulate the type of example that you've set. Um, and it's an interesting time in history because we're sort of on the cusp now of maybe our technology being good enough to see if we're alone in the universe or not. We're learning so much about how we interact with all the other animal species on this planet, but it seems unlikely that of the essentially infinite number of stars and planets that exist, that this is the only one that has life. So that will be for future conversation. Before we run out of time, there was something you said that I don't want to, I'm going to grab something off the internet that's inaccurate, but I think I heard you say that the process of dying is something that you wish to avoid. And what did you mean by that? A lot of people, I think, have thought about it here during COVID times, but what did you mean by that? And maybe more importantly, how does that affect your choices?
Okay, well, first of all, what I meant was it's the process of dying. I mean, if you die of COVID-19, it's a horrible death, absolutely beastly death. People who get cancer, people who go, like my mother, with Parkinson's. It's that process of dying. It's that the pain and the perhaps losing control of your body, that part, awful. But death itself, I'm not afraid of death itself. I look upon it, either it's the end of everything, in which case, well, that's the end of everything, or there's something. And if there's something, which I happen to believe there is, then that has to be the most exciting adventure of my life, finding out what's there, what it is. But what's fascinated me is that some of the very best brains on our planet right now have come around to thinking there is intelligence behind the universe. It's not just a collection of chance atoms bumping into atoms. And when people say, oh, we know it started with the Big Bang. Well, maybe the universe and the planets, everything started with the Big Bang, but what was before the Big Bang? So my mind can't, I used to spend hours as a child thinking, well, time, there must be a beginning of time, but there can't be a beginning of time because there must have been time before time. And it was the same with space. It must end, but it can't end because if it ends, what's beyond it?
It's on the
Did
other
you ever
side.
have this feeling?
Of course, and we, floating on a spaceship, we ponder exactly the same questions, of course, and so many are unknowable. I don't know what an octopus wonders about. I've seen a wonderful video of an octopus dreaming,
Yes,
um,
yes.
and you can to have that level of imagination. And I don't know if you ever observed the chimpanzees dreaming, but do you think that all intelligent life shares a sense of mysticism like you've been speaking of?
Well, the closest we come to it with chimpanzees is there's these amazing waterfalls in Gombe. And there's one in particular, and it drops about 80 feet. It's only a stream, really, but the roaring it makes when it drops down 80 feet onto the gravelly stream bed, you hear it as you move up the valley, and it gets louder, especially in the wet season. And when the chimps are approaching, sometimes the hair bristles, which is excitement. And then they may do these amazing waterfall, I call them a waterfall dance or a waterfall display, and they sway from side to side upright, and they may climb the vines beside the waterfall and push out in the spray. And then afterwards, if you can see them sitting, looking up, following with their eyes the water, and then here's the water right by me, and then following it away. So what is this stuff that's always coming? It's always here, but it's always going. And if they had language, there's our big difference. And they could sit and discuss with each other. That could it not lead to one of the early animistic religions, the worship of those things which people didn't understand, like the sun and the moon and thunder. And so it's a feeling of awe that I believe they feel. So same when sudden heavy rain, you get the same, you get a rain dance, same swaying from side to side. And, you know, it could be challenging the elements, or it could be awe, this suddenly out of nowhere, everything changes.
The feeling of awe being the very basis of mysticism itself. Yeah, and it's wonderful to be able to see that in another species, even one as close to ours, I'm sure. You just spoke of language, though. And you have been so eloquent in the time with me and with us, but also throughout your life, in all the projects you've been involved with, and the institute that you set up and working with Roots and Shoots with youth all around the world. Understanding that we're not the only tool maker and getting a deeper understanding of chimpanzees is important. But to me, what you chose to do with that understanding is perhaps more important, and the educational side of things. And I'd like to finish our time together here, Dr. Goodall, if we could, on your perspectives. Jane, thank you. If you could just tell me how important education is in your life, and education in all of its forms, but the same as that ability of the apes looking at the waterfall to try and share their understanding and respect for something that's happening in front of them. What are your views on the necessity for education and the importance of it to us individually and collectively as a species?
I think it's one of the most important, particularly for our young people. And so often what we might see as cruel behavior or bad behavior is because people are ignorant, they haven't understood. That's how I always have to think about it when I see the cruelty that exists to animals and to each other. And so education, it's one of the things, you know, I talked about alleviating poverty. So because chimpanzees are vanishing across Africa and forests are vanishing around the world, all the way around in 6 countries around chimp habitat, we work with the local people. We give them the tools like smartphones to measure the health of their forests. But we introduce programs to help them find ways of making a living without destroying the environment. And education is hugely important. So our Roots and Shoots program, we try and put in the schools all around, as far out as we can from the chimp, also in the capital cities around the world, I mean, everywhere really, so that young people have a chance to understand the role that they can play, that they understand that every day each one of us lives, we make an impact on the planet and we can choose what sort of impact we make. And so educating young people about the magic, I mean, there's so much still to learn, and you know that from space. But just on this one planet, there's so much left to learn. And in places we're destroying it, the environment, before we've learned about it. And the more we educate people, the less likely they are to destroy, as long as they have in their hands the implements to enable them to find a way of living without destroying. And if we can come out of this pandemic with a new way of relating to the natural world, and perhaps most important, a new definition of success. At the moment, success for many people is tied up with making a lot of money, acquiring a lot of stuff, and gaining power. But a successful life is one where you achieve your dreams, and where I think people are most happy when they're doing things to help other people. Somehow I feel that that's really important. And other people, other animals, or whatever it is, so you feel your life has a value. So education, yes, terribly, terribly important. And not all, please, not all virtual education on little smartphones and things, but being out in nature. And yeah, I guess you can have a special education when you put yourself out of your spacecraft. But most of us won't do that.
Well, I think you're the very embodiment of someone who has studied and learned, but then taken your own personal principles and done your best to educate others, and not just, as you say, through the normal strictures of education, whether it's e-learning right now or within the brick and mortar walls, but trying to find other means through the Jane Goodall Institute, or maybe even more visibly through Roots and Shoots, where you give people a reason to learn, and a recognition that their learning and their improved understanding can actually help to accomplish the things that are important to them in their lives. I can think of very few human beings that have done that more effectively than you have, Jane. And thank you so much for the life's work so far. I'm looking forward greatly to all the things that you're going to do next. And just before we go, perhaps what strikes me the most is your sense of grace, especially during COVID times right now. We lack the inner calm and peace and perspective, um, and ability to deal with what's happening, to actually find that grace within ourselves, to deal with the realities of life. And you can almost feel it coming off you in waves, that wonderful, enviable feeling of grace. And for me, it's what I'll take away from our conversation. And it's been a joy. Thank you for taking so much out of your time, especially now into the evening in Bournemouth. I look forward to giving you a chimpanzee hug when we get a chance after this particular pandemic to meet you in person there in Bournemouth. I'm not sure if you have anything else specific that you want to say, but on behalf of myself and everyone at Elevate Endeavour, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And, sharing your perspective from space is very important. Helps people to understand how vulnerable this little planet is, how precious it is, how we all must work. And what we're doing now is still stealing our children's future. You've got grandchildren, and we've just got to start healing the harm that we've inflicted and slowing down climate change. Each one of us doing our bit and trying to elect the right leaders and the right corporate leaders as well as political leaders around the world. So, thank you, Chris, and it's been lovely talking to you.
Been a delight. Thank you, Jane.